A couple of weeks back, Mark Millar showed up on the channel for a live stream, and I guess he kicked up a hornet's nest by pointing out there are issues within the comic book industry. He basically pointed out and said Saga was like the last big phenomenon in comic books. And this brought out a lot of people that were very unhappy with what Mark had said. It said, look, we've got a chart of Image Comics #1 titles that sold well. That is the end all be all. This isn't a discussion. Everything's doing great. Creator-owned comics have never been stronger. I poked holes in that. Doc poked holes in that. I think everyone poked holes in that had any type of actual common sense. Now people are walking back that statement. And now the new idea, the way that you save comic books, the comic book industry for the current malaise that it's in, and creator-owned books is an actual sales chart. If people knew just how successful some of these comic books were, that would be the actual mechanism that would save the comic book industry. This is the most ridiculous, dumbest argument I've ever heard in my life. We haven't had definitive sales numbers for well over a year at this point, probably going on 2 years. And I do not believe that that's the reason that comic books aren't telling exciting, really awesome action-based stories at this point. I don't think the sales chart is the reason that there aren't a lot of big-name creators sitting at DC Comics and Marvel Comics right now getting people excited to go to their comic book shop every Tuesday and Wednesday. If we actually had sales data, a real sales chart, I think a lot of those people's bubbles would be burst when they realize just how unpopular their crap comic book stories are right now. The leading hype person for this theory that comic sales charts could save everything is Heidi MacDonald. She had a recent article expanding on what Mark Millar had said and basically retracting that maybe there wasn't anything to what he said. Maybe he was a little bit right. At least some publishers are itching to see sales charts once again so they can tout their success. As I discussed this with colleagues, both in person and online, the general consensus is that we need sales charts. One well-informed person even suggested that without them, the periodical might be in real trouble. I'm not sure if that's true, but it's a concerning matter. I just have a sneaking suspicion that one well-informed person that thinks without sales charts, periodicals are done for is Brian Hibbs. That's the most Brian Hibbs quote I think I've ever heard in my life. I personally don't believe that sales charts can really do anything good or bad regarding future sales or past sales or anything like that. They just give you an idea of what's popular, what's not popular. How are sales doing now compared to a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago? You actually get some definitive proof on what's going on rather than anecdotal evidence, which is great for people like me and people that are reporting on the industry. And it does make it very difficult to quantify everything that's going on. But believe me, like, there's no doubt in my mind that if Marvel Comics wanted you and I and everyone to see their sales numbers, they could release that data. That is their data to do what they please with it, and they've chosen not to release that data. I imagine there's a reason for that. If DC Comics with Lunar wanted to release the definitive numbers associated with DC Comics sales every single week, month, year, quarter, whatever they wanted to do, they could do it, and it would be definitive because it's their data. If Image Comics wanted to release a monthly statement, these are the Image Comics sales numbers, that data would absolutely come out. This idea that they're just, man, we would just all love to show you our data, but I don't know if everyone else is going to do the same thing that I am. I think people would be very crestfallen if they saw those numbers. And that's probably one of the many, many, many reasons DC Comics, Marvel Comics, Image Comics, Lunar, Penguin Random House, all the people that are involved in this choose to hold on to this data and not share it with people. If they really thought that it would save the industry and people would get back into their comic book shops by releasing the data, they would actually be incentivized to do it. But they have some common sense, and they know that is not the case. And one of these big successes that has Image Comics just champing at the bit is World Tree by James Tynion. And this is the information that we do have. Image Comics set out a release noting that multiple issues of James Tynion and Fernando Blanco's best-selling World Tree are being rushed back to print this week in order to keep up with escalating demand. World Tree issues 1 through 4 reprints will hit shelves this September. The 5th printing of World Tree #1 brings the number of copies in print to over 150,000 in notes. That 150,000 copy figure is useful for those of you keeping score at home. And while we don't know what else was big this month, Stevenson and Tynion's statements could stand in for our imaginary sales chart, where World Tree #1 is the top-selling book if you squint a little. And I think it's great that there's a big success for James Tynion and World Tree. And I hope the demand continues to grow and grow and grow and escalate, and people get super duper enthusiastic, and word reaches people outside of comic books that you need to go to your comic book shop. I know you don't know where it is. You need to find it. You need to pick up the series and you need to read it every single month, and you need to go to your comic book shop continuously and hopefully find more comic books, because that's what we need. We need a Saga-like phenomenon. But this isn't that. This is the very first issue of something that is doing very well and has the potential in the long term to be a phenomenon in comic books. But even if you squint really, really hard, you can't see it being the number one book and overtaking Batman and Amazing Spider-Man, because it took 5 printings to get to 155,000. And herein lies the real problem with all this. The big thing behind that sales chart that we got was, look at all these enormous sales on number one issues. No one has ever claimed that Image Comics, DC Comics, Marvel Comics, Boom Studios, anybody can't spike a number on a number one issue. There's a lot of ways they do this. There's an enormous speculator market working right now that's helping a lot of these comic book shops get by right now, because they are going out there and buying the number one issues. The fact that they're not buying the number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 issues is the real problem. And that's what Mark Millar was talking about. We haven't had that phenomenon that just grew and grew and grew with time. Heidi MacDonald does reluctantly agree that Mark Millar has a point. All that said, more than one person pointed out that the Image number one chart is kind of meaningless to show long-term success. Number one sell a gazillion copies, and by issue number 3, it's 1/3 of that, if you're lucky. Saga, the book that everyone seems to agree we need a new one of, did not make the top 25 chart, but has gone on to be one of Image's steadiest sellers, with volume number 10, Image's second best-selling book of 2022, according to BookScan. Number one sales are also dependent on all kinds of stunts and variants. The chart is interesting, but it's not really useful. Well, I'm glad someone got some common sense out there and realized that perhaps, just perhaps, the sales chart of number one issues over the last 5 years that have done really, really well isn't the smoking gun in all of this in disproving what Mark Millar has said. In fact, it kind of just proves it, because in there you see a lot of titles that started out with a ton of hype. And a lot of people went out there and got that number one issue because the momentum itself was unsustainable over the long period. Now, there certainly have been some things from Marvel and DC Comics over the past 5 years that have had a ton of momentum and built up. House of X, Powers of 10. I can't imagine anything being more successful than that, to actually get old readers that had given up on comic books back into comic book shops and sampling the new wares. But unfortunately, that one wasn't long-lasting either. And that's what Mark is saying. You need to have big-time titles from DC and Marvel Comics that keep people coming in, because those are the titles, those are the heroes that keep people coming in week after week. Thankfully for Image Comics, The Walking Dead was that. Unfortunately, it's done now. Although people are still buying the new deluxe editions of The Walking Dead, and Saga did become that. But there are really no other examples in indie comic books about that right now. Mark Millar was 100% right on the money. You need a very successful, thriving Marvel and DC at the same time if you want to see huge explosions on the indie comic scene. Remember, when Saga broke out, it wasn't like Saga was just sitting there. Nothing else was good at the time that had people coming into their comic book shops. Saga kind of comes out during the New 52, when all of a sudden all these people came back and they actually wanted to read DC comic books again. And you had more people in the shops. It just so happened there was a title, there was an alternative there, and it turned out it was really good. It built up its own fan base. Word of mouth spread, and all of a sudden it was a wildfire. It was a phenomenon unto itself. Do you think something like Saga could become the phenomenon that it is today, with nothing else there to help prop it up, nothing else there to keep people coming in week after week and remembering, oh yeah, I really like this Saga book, I should continue on with this? DC and Marvel do not need to be the end-all be-all of good comic books, but they do need to have quality. And that's the real problem with all of this. That's the thing that Mark Millar is saying out there. There is no loyalty to characters anymore because there's no continuity out there, but there is still loyalty to comic book creators. Unfortunately, most of the creators that people are loyal to aren't working for Marvel right now, aren't working for DC right now, and in a lot of cases, they're not even working in comic books right now. His idea of bringing a lot of these veteran writers back that have had enormous success just to prop up everything around them is something that might not be long-term sustainable, but it would give them an opportunity, them being DC, Marvel, and a lot of these creator-owned titles, an opportunity to start growing again. Another article was released on this, begrudgingly admitting Mark Millar was probably right. It was from sketch.com. I kind of like this site. There is a paywall to some of it, but most of the stuff that they do give you for free is really insightful, and he actually talked about it there as well. A slumping Big Two has an area of effect that impacts every other direct market publisher. I saw some people bristle at this suggestion, in that Scholastic, Graphics, and Viz and Webtoon are actually the biggest names in the game, so why focus on Marvel and DC? And sure, that's true as well, but it isn't necessarily true for comic shops, a domain in which the success of DC and Marvel still has an outsized impact. Those publishers struggling means others in the direct market struggle as well, as Millar mentioned. And I do not want to speak for Mark Millar. I do talk to him behind the scenes from time to time, but he is his own man and he has his own words. But I'm pretty certain that Mark Millar is in the same boat I am, that I'm not championing DC and Marvel to save Barnes and Noble. I'm not championing DC and Marvel to save Amazon. I'm not championing DC and Marvel to go out there and help out Walmart. Those are big-ass corporations. They're going to be successful one way or the other. I am championing local comic book shops. I am championing the culture that is around comic books that we all know and love and that is being destroyed because there isn't enough good material out there to sustain local comic book shops for the long term. I'm a long-term thinker, and I want comic book shops to be around when my kids are 15, when they're 16, when they're 20. I want them to be able to take their kids to a local comic book shop and talk about how Grandpa introduced them to Batman and Captain America and all these wonderful characters and Robin or whatever like that. I don't want to lose this stuff. That's why I'm here. That's why I talk about these issues. I'm not happy that Marvel and DC are doing very well. I wish they were doing great. I wish tomorrow they could release sales data and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe Spider-Man is actually selling 225,000 copies a month. My goodness, I didn't realize Batman is actually sitting at 190,000 copies sold every single month. Things are so much better than what I believe are going on. Things are so much better than the anecdotal evidence that we do have suggests that they are. Maybe there's only 12 shops out there that are struggling and they're the only ones talking, but everyone else is making money hand over fist. I hope that is the case, but it's not. Because if it was, you would be seeing articles from comic book shops being like, oh my goodness, I can't keep this material on the shelves. It's selling faster than I can order it. I've never made this much money in my life. That is not what's going on right now. And DC and Marvel, whether they want to admit it or accept it or not, do have a responsibility not only to the readers who are their customers, but to the retailers who are their customers. They're putting a lot of people in bad positions by not going out of their way to put out the very best stories, featuring the best damn superheroes in the entire world. And that's what's really frustrating about all of this. I'm not doom and gloom. I don't want anything to be going bad. I want everyone to make money hand over fist. I think James Tynion personally is very overrated. But I think it's great that World Tree is doing better than they anticipated. I think it's great that World Tree apparently is a big success. I hope it continues on and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Because I don't need James Tynion because I don't think he's a great writer like some other people to fail to make me happy. I'm glad he's doing well in spite of how I feel about him. But there's so much stuff out there that is truly bad that isn't doing well right now. And that's the big problem. There's no quality. The sketch article then goes on to talk about Saga. Saga is a smash hit that shops want more of, is that it didn't launch big. It grew and grew and grew and became a stable sales monster for comic shops, one that customers return for every time an issue arrives. Saga's superpower wasn't its opening box office. It was and is its legs. And during the past few years, fueled by the pandemic surge of collectors and speculators, launching comics has not been a problem. The problem has been what happens with issue 2, 3, 4, and God help you if you make it to issue number 5. Attrition, or effectively how sales decrease issue to issue, has been the killer. And I believe that attrition has taken in because people have lost faith, not in the medium. I think people still love comic books and they have faith in the characters and the medium itself. I think we can see that by the back issue market and how bustling and thriving it is right now. But they have lost faith in Marvel. They have lost faith in DC that they can steadily deliver good quality stories at scale. Yes, there are a couple of good series right now from Marvel, and there are a few more from DC, all going on at the same time. But really, you can count them on one hand, and if not, definitely on two. There isn't enough quality out there right now, and you can see it because people don't come back for issue number 2 or 3 because they get their number 1 issue, they get that cover that they like, maybe it's that first appearance that they wanted, and then they move on to the next speculator comic book, and there's nothing really to satiate the actual readers themselves. That's why people are moving on, and that's what Mark Millar saw, and that's what he wants to fix. The fact that people are out there pushing against him, I saw there was a video just kind of trashing him that came out within the last 24 hours. This dude loves comic books. This dude wants to save comic books, and he's actually got a plan to try and do it, which is a lot more than I can say for Jim Lee or CB Cebulski. If you would like some more information about how people responded to Mark Millar and what he had to say, I actually made this video with Doc talking about the enormous hissy fit they threw and how we were easily able to punch holes in all their stupid arguments. There's also a link in the video description.